Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that I think is super relatable. Social behavior.
Ooh,
Specifically, how being around other people can totally change the way we act and perform.
like when you're giving a presentation and you totally nail it, even though you were super nervous beforehand, or the opposite, like when you're working on a group project and you find yourself kind of losing motivation.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
to really understand these weird social forces, we're diving into a fascinating chapter called Cognition and Behavior, Social Loafing and Social Facilitation.
Etchy title, right?
It is.
It's from the book Social Cognition, The Construction of the Self in Social Contexts by Alen Gavreliuk.
In this chapter, I think it really gets to the heart of how our performance can shift depending on whether we're alone or surrounded by others.
Totally. We'll be focusing on two key concepts. Social facilitation, where, believe it or not, our performance can actually improve around others.
Really, I would think it would make people more nervous.
You'd think so, right? And then we've got social loafing, which is basically the opposite, where being part of a group can actually make us, well, slack off a bit.
Ah, the classic group project phenomenon.
Exactly. But it's actually much more nuanced than just good or bad.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of those concepts, I'm curious, how essential are other people to how we see ourselves? It's like, can we even have a sense of self without others around?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's something that's debated quite a bit in psychology.
Hmm.
But if you think about it, from the moment we're born, we're surrounded by other people, right? Like it's parents, family, caregivers, and these individuals and groups, they all play a huge role in shaping who we become.
So it's nature and nurture?
Exactly. We learn from them, we interact with them, we compare ourselves to them, and all of this helps us build our sense of self.
Okay, so how does this actually work, developmentally?
Well, think about babies.
Okay.
At first, they're totally self-centered, right?
Yeah.
Like their world revolves entirely around their own needs and sensations.
Yeah, they're tiny little dictators ruling their own miniature kingdoms.
Exactly. But as they grow and develop, something amazing happens.
Okay, what's that?
They start to understand that other people are separate individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and needs. Piaget, the famous developmental psychologist, called this process decentration.
Decentration. That sounds like a major aha moment. Like, hold on, there's a whole world outside of me.
It is. It's a gradual process, but eventually kids realize that they're not the center of the universe.
That must rock their world.
It does, and it's actually crucial for their social development because it allows them to develop empathy and learn to cooperate.
So basically, we start off totally egocentric,
Mhm.
but as we mature, we become more other-focused.
Right. But what's even more interesting is that as we age and approach the later stages of life, there's this kind of shift back towards the self.
Really? So we come full circle.
In a way, yeah.
Wow. That's both fascinating and a little bit sad.
I know, right? Thanatopsychology, which focuses on the psychological aspects of death and dying, suggests that as we get closer to the end of our lives, we naturally start focusing more on our own needs and experiences again.
I guess it makes sense, kind of coming to terms with our own mortality and all that.
It's a natural part of the life cycle.
Wow, that's deep.
It is. And, it's within this whole journey of shifting between self and other that things like social facilitation and loafing take place.
Okay, that's a perfect segue. So let's jump into social facilitation first.
Let's do it.
So this is where, as you said, our performance can sometimes improve when we're around other people. That seems counterintuitive, but I'm intrigued. So tell me more.
Right. You'd think all that pressure would make us choke, but back in the 1920s, Floyd Allport, a pioneering social psychologist, really started to uncover the power of this thing called social facilitation.
Social facilitation's a good name for it, but what did he actually do? How did he study this?
Well, I'm sure you've heard of that classic study about bicycle racers performing better when they're competing against each other.
Yeah, vaguely remind me.
Okay, so that was actually way back in 1898
Wow.
by a researcher named Norman Triplett. And he observed that cyclists actually had faster times when they were racing against other cyclists compared to when they were just racing against the clock.
So it's like the competition really pushed them to perform better.
Exactly. And that study kind of laid the groundwork for this whole idea of social facilitation, which Allport then explored more systematically.
Got it. So what did Allport do?
Well, he looked at two main settings for social facilitation.
Okay.
There's co-action, where you're basically doing the same task as other people at the same time, kind of like in that cycling study.
Okay, so like working out at the gym, we're all doing the same thing, but not really together.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's audience settings, where you're performing in front of a group, like giving a presentation or playing an instrument. And to really get at this, Allport, he did a bunch of cool experiments, like one involving word association, where participants had to write down as many associations as possible for a given word.
Word association, like if I say dog, you say...
A cat.
Exactly. Okay, so they did this word association thing.
Yeah, and they did it alone first, to get a baseline, and then they did it again, but this time with other people present.
I'm guessing they came up with more words when there was an audience.
You got it. A whopping 93% of the participants generated more associations when they weren't alone.
93%? That's a huge difference.
It is, and here's the really wild part. This pattern held true even when Allport made the task more difficult. Like, he even had them argue against the ideas of Roman philosophers, to really make them think.
Wait, so even when it was harder, they still did better with an audience?
It seems crazy, right? But that's what he found.
Okay, I'm officially mind blown.
It is remarkable, but it's super important to remember that social facilitation, it's not like this universal rule that applies to everyone all the time, okay? It's more of a statistical trend, meaning that on average, people tend to perform better in certain situations when others are around.
That makes sense.
And even Allport himself acknowledged that some people actually perform better when they're alone.
Okay, so why the different responses then? Like, why do some people thrive under pressure while others totally crumble?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And that's where we get into some really interesting theories.
Hit me with them.
All right, so one of the most influential theories in this area is called drive theory, and it was proposed by Robert Zajonc back in 1965.
Drive theory. Okay.
Yeah, and the basic idea is that the presence of other people increases our arousal and anxiety levels, which then amplifies what's called our dominant response.
Okay, dominant response. What's that?
Think of it like this. It's the response that you're most likely to make in a given situation. Okay. So if it's a simple, well-learned task, something you've done a million times, your dominant response is probably the correct one.
Yeah, it's like muscle memory.
Exactly. So in those cases, the increased arousal from having an audience can actually help you perform even better because it kind of kicks you into gear.
So it's like a performance boost.
Exactly. But here's the catch. If the task is complex or unfamiliar, something you're not as good at yet.
Then our dominant response might be to, like, freeze up or make mistakes.
Bingo. And that's when social facilitation can totally backfire, leading to a decline in performance, which is why we see things like test anxiety or stage fright.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm pretty sure my brain turns to mush whenever I have to speak in public.
It happens to the best of us. So yeah, social facilitation, it's not a simple good or bad thing. It really depends on a bunch of factors, like the difficulty of the task, how skilled you are at it, and how you personally react to all that extra arousal.
So it's like this interplay between the situation and our individual differences.
Exactly. We're all wired a little differently, and that definitely plays a role in how we respond to social pressure.
Makes sense. So we've talked about how the presence of others can get our hearts racing, but like, why does this happen? Is it just biology, or is it something we learn, like nature versus nurture?
You hit the nail on the head. It's the classic nature-nurture debate, but like applied to stage fright.
Huh. Okay, so where do we land on that?
Well, there are kind of two main camps in the research on this. Some researchers believe that a lot of it is hardwired. It's just in our genes. Like Zajonc's research, remember him?
Drive theory guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, his research also showed that just being around other people, even without any direct interaction, like no talking or anything, can actually trigger physiological changes.
Really? Like what kind of changes?
Oh, things like increased adrenaline, heart rate going up, all that fun stuff.
The feeling of being watched.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of suggests that there might be a really basic instinctive element to it.
So like it's evolutionarily adaptive.
Right. Think about it. For our ancestors, being surrounded by strangers could have been dangerous, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So that ancient fight or flight response might still be kicking in even today, even if the threat is just, giving a presentation.
That makes a lot of sense. But hold on. If it were purely genetic, Wouldn't everyone react the same way to an audience?
You would think so, right? And that's where the nurture part comes in. It turns out it's not just about the presence of others, but also about the meaning we give to that audience.
Meaning?
Like, okay, think about it this way. Would you be more nervous presenting to your close friends or to a panel of experts in your field?
Oh, experts for sure. Like their opinion actually matters.
Exactly. And there was this really cool study back in 1968 by Henchy and Glass.
Okay.
And they found that people actually experienced the biggest performance boost when they felt like the audience was judging them or when they perceived the audience as experts.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. But just having neutral observers around people who they didn't really care about didn't have the same effect.
So it's not just about being watched. It's about being watched by people whose opinions we care about.
Exactly. It's like we're trying to impress them or at least avoid looking like a fool.
Makes sense.
And this all ties into something called evaluation apprehension, which basically means we're worried about being judged.
Evaluation apprehension. Okay, I'm going to write that one down.
It's a mouthful.
It is.
But the idea is that we're social creatures, right? We care what other people think of us. And when we feel like we're being evaluated, it can trigger that same arousal response that Zajant talked about, the whole heart racing thing.
So is that it then? Is social facilitation all about just wanting to look good in front of other people?
Well, it's definitely a big part of it, for sure. But it's not the whole story.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah. Evaluation apprehension is a key piece of the puzzle, but researchers have actually come up with a bunch of other theories to try to explain what's going on.
Lay 'em on me.
Okay, so one prominent idea is called the distraction conflict theory, and this was proposed by Robert Barron in 1986.
Okay, distraction conflict theory. What's that all about?
So basically it says that having an audience, it kind of divides our attention. We're trying to focus on the task at hand.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're also kind of naturally drawn to the people watching us.
Like we can't help but notice them out of the corner of our eye.
Exactly. And so this conflict between focusing on the task and paying attention to the audience, it increases arousal, which, remember, can either help or hinder performance depending on what you're doing.
Right. It all comes back to that dominant response thing.
Bingo.
Okay, what else?
Well, there's also social monitoring theory, which comes from the work of Bernard Guerin.
Social monitoring, okay.
Yeah. And this theory basically suggests that we're wired to pay attention to other people's behavior, especially those we see as unfamiliar or maybe even threatening.
Ooh, that makes sense, like from a survival standpoint.
Right. It's like we're constantly scanning our environment for cues about what other people are doing and thinking.
Yeah, like trying to figure out if they're friend or foe.
Exactly. But this constant vigilance, it can be distracting, especially when the audience is unfamiliar.
Right, because we're trying to figure them out.
Exactly. And that can lead to increased arousal and, the rest of the story.
So it's not just about being evaluated, but also about trying to decipher all those social cues.
Exactly. It's like a whole social puzzle we're trying to solve while also trying to perform.
My brain hurts just thinking about it.
I know, right?
Okay, so distraction conflict theory, social monitoring theory. What other theories are there?
So then we get into some theories that are all about self-awareness and self-attention.
Oh, okay, those are interesting.
Yeah, so like Duvall and Wickland's self-awareness theory from 1972, it suggests that when we're in social situations, we become more aware of ourselves as objects being observed.
Like we're suddenly under a microscope.
Exactly. And this can lead to us comparing ourselves to certain standards, which can be really anxiety-provoking, especially for complex tasks where we're more likely to mess up.
Ugh. Yeah, like all our imperfections are suddenly on full display.
Right. And then there's Carver and Shire's self-attention theory, which is similar, but it focuses on how we regulate our behavior by comparing ourselves to our own internalized standards.
So like our inner critic gets louder when there's an audience.
Exactly. And this self-evaluation process, it can become really intense when we're around other people, especially if we're not sure how they perceive us.
So it's like we're trying to judge ourselves before they can judge us.
You got it. And then last but not least, there's Bond's theory of self-esteem seeking, which was proposed in 1982.
Self-esteem seeking, okay.
Yeah, and this one's all about our desire to look good in front of others, to impress them and boost our own self-esteem.
I mean, who doesn't want to make a good impression?
Right. But here's the thing. For simple tasks, this can be really motivating. But for complex tasks where success is less certain, that fear of not measuring up can lead to anxiety and actually make us perform worse.
So it's like we're so worried about failing that we end up psyching ourselves out.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, trying too hard.
Wow. So it's incredible how many different factors can influence how we perform when other people are around.
It really is. Social facilitation, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. It's this complex interplay of our biology, our psychology, and the social context.
It really shows how we're not just individuals, we're social beings through and through.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, so we've talked about social facilitation and how having an audience can sometimes, surprisingly, make us perform better. But now I want to get into this idea of social loafing, which is like the opposite, right?
It is. It's kind of the flip side of the coin where being part of a group can actually make us put in less effort.
Yeah, like we're slacking off because we think other people will pick up the slack.
It's a classic phenomenon. And you know what's funny? It all started with a simple rope pulling experiment.
Rope pulling. Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah. Back in 1913, this French engineer named Max Ringelmann,
Okay.
he noticed something interesting. He had people pull on a rope, you know, like a tug-of-war kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he measured their force, first individually and then in groups.
Okay, so what happened?
Well, you would think that a group's total force would just be the sum of each individual's effort, right?
Yeah, I mean, more people equals more power, right?
Right. But that's not what he found.
Really?
Yeah, he found that as the group size increased, the total force they exerted was actually less than the sum of their individual potential.
So they were holding back.
Basically, people were putting in less effort when they were part of a group.
Oh my gosh, I've totally seen this happen, like in group projects, you know? There's always that one person who's kind of just coasting along while everyone else is doing the work.
Oh yeah, totally. We've all been there, haven't we? And even in something like, say, band practice, right? Like there's always someone who's just kind of there.
Oh, totally. Just going through the motions.
Exactly. So this phenomenon is what we call social loafing.
Social loafing. It's a good name for it.
It is. And it's formally defined as the tendency to put in less effort on tasks where individual contributions are kind of pooled together towards a shared goal.
So it's not just laziness. It's more about how our motivation changes when we're part of a team.
Exactly. It's about the group dynamics, the psychology of it all.
And it's like a universal thing. Does social loafing happen everywhere?
It's pretty widespread, but research has shown that it's actually less common in collectivist cultures.
Collectivist cultures.
Yeah, like those that emphasize group harmony and shared responsibility compared to more individualistic cultures where it's more about, personal achievement.
So our cultural background can influence how we behave in groups.
Absolutely. But even within a given culture, social loafing is still a pretty common thing, So the question is, why do we do it?
Yeah, is it just laziness or is there something deeper going on?
It's rarely just laziness, although, sometimes it might be. But there are actually a few psychological mechanisms that can explain why we put in less effort when we're part of a team.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, one key concept is something called diffusion of responsibility.
Diffusion of responsibility, okay.
This was proposed by Bibb Latany back in 1981.
Okay.
And the idea is that in bigger groups, we feel less personally accountable for the outcome,
Right, it's like if the whole project fails, no one can really blame me specifically. Right?
Exactly. It's harder to pinpoint who's responsible when there are more people involved.
Classic buck passing.
Right. But there are also these motivational theories that go beyond just responsibility.
Okay, like what?
Well, these theories focus on how we perceive the value and impact of our efforts within a group, Like if we feel like our contributions aren't really noticeable or if we don't expect to be rewarded for our hard work, then we're just less likely to, really go the extra mile.
It's like, why bother?
Yeah.
Right, if no one's going to notice anyway.
Exactly. And this actually leads us to one of the most influential models of social loafing, which is called the collective effort model.
Collective effort model.
Yeah. This was developed by Stephen Carell and Kipling Williams back in 1993.
Okay, so what's the gist of this collective effort model?
So it basically says that our motivation in group settings depends on three key things: expectancy, instrumentality, and valuing.
Expectancy, instrumentality, and valuing. Got it.
So expectancy is basically our belief that our effort will actually lead to better results,
Right.
But in a group setting, it can be hard to know for sure whether your individual contribution will really make a difference, especially if you don't know how everyone else is performing.
Yeah, totally. It's like, if everyone else is slacking, what's the point of me going all out, right?
Right. And then there's instrumentality, which is our belief that those good results will actually be noticed and rewarded.
Okay, so like getting recognition for your hard work.
Exactly. But again, in a group, it can be harder to tell who did what. So you might not get credit for your individual efforts.
Ugh, yeah, I hate when that happens.
We've all been there. And finally, there's valuing, which is simply how much we care about the rewards that are being offered.
Right, so if we don't really care about the outcome, why bother putting in the effort?
Exactly. And if expectancy and instrumentality are both low, then we tend to devalue the task and the rewards, which just leads to more loafing.
This is a vicious cycle. So is social loafing just inevitable then? Like, is there anything we can do to prevent it?
That's the good news. It's not inevitable. There's actually a lot we can do to minimize social loafing.
Okay, I'm all ears, tell me everything.
Well, first of all, we're much less likely to loaf if the task itself is engaging and meaningful. If we actually care about what we're doing.
Right, so make it interesting.
Exactly. We're also less likely to loaf if we respect and value our teammates, and if we feel like our individual contributions are being recognized and appreciated.
So it's about building a strong team culture where everyone feels valued.
Exactly. And it also helps to keep groups relatively small and to foster a sense of cohesion.
Right, so smaller, more connected groups where everyone feels like they have a voice.
Precisely. And strong leadership is key too.
Yeah.
Leaders who are actively involved, who clearly define roles and expectations, and who make an effort to recognize individual contributions can really help minimize social loafing.
So it's not just about the individuals in the group, but also about how the group is structured and led.
Exactly. It's a combination of factors.
Wow, this has been a fascinating deep dive into social facilitation and social loafing. It's amazing how much the simple presence of other people can impact our behavior and performance.
It really is. And it just goes to show that we humans are truly social creatures, through and through.
Will said. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. How might you structure your own collaborations or work environments to, kind of leverage the power of social facilitation and minimize those pesky social loafing effects? It's something to ponder as you go about your day. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.